been searching for the best way to generate passive income in your life and heard that real estate is a great way to do it. But you're tired of all the so-called gurus who are all talk and no substance. Get ready to celebrate because Kevin Buck has spent 14 years successfully making it happen. This is the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast. Now, here's Kevin Buck.
Hey guys, Kevin Buck here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast, where our mission is to help you build and maintain massive amounts of cash flow through income-producing real estate investments. Now, our guest for this week's show is Senior Managing Director and Editor of Apartment Guide and Rent.com, Brian Carberry. Now, Brian has more than 15 years of experience as a content creator and award-winning journalist, and is currently the Senior Managing Editor of Apartment Guide and Rent.com. His work has been featured on CNN, Search Engine Land, Campaign Monitor, and a number of other organizations around the world. So guys, I'm excited to have Brian here today and have him as a guest on our show. But before we bring him on, I have a few quick housekeeping items to run through. As I've mentioned now for the last couple of episodes, our third mobile home park investment fund recently went live. And so if you would like to learn more about partnering with my team and I on future opportunities, you can go over to investwithsunrise.com. Again, that's investwithsunrise.com. And there you can watch our most recent webinar. You can access our PPM and offering documents and basically learn the ins and outs of that current offering and some of the deals that we've got both in the fund already and as well as in the works. And I suggest if you don't know too much about mobile home parks, come on over and learn why we feel mobile home parks are not only the best real estate investment, but probably the most tax efficient real estate investment vehicle available. And so, there's a reason out there why some of the big PE firms are jumping into the space with billions of dollars. Okay. So again, go to investwithsunrise.com to learn more. Moving on here. If you love what we're doing here at the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast, please take a moment and subscribe to the show. That way you get notified of when new episodes come out. But also, again, if you love the show, you feel like it adds value to you and your business, take a moment to leave a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you might be listening to this show on whatever platform. It really helps us attract awesome guests such as Brian to the show. And lastly here, guys, before we introduce Brian, I want to remind you of the free 30-minute call I offer each and every Friday. This is something I've been doing for years. I've talked to hundreds of you, and there's no ulterior motive here. I think at least one of the calls every week, someone asks me, why do you do these calls, right? You're busy. Like, why you set aside, an hour and a half of your Friday, so 30-minute time slots. Why do you do that to speak to strangers that listen to your show? Well, the reason is that I love meeting new people, and I really enjoy, just sharing kind of the same passion for real estate investing that, tens of thousands or millions of other people have. And so I've had the opportunity of talking with hundreds of you. I haven't kept count, but it's been a lot. And I've met some really cool folks over these years that I've been doing those calls. And and he made some really good friends out of it. So would love to chat with you and, be a sounding board. And it really doesn't matter if you're brand new or a seasoned pro, okay? Whether you're just getting started and you're trying to figure out what your path looks like as a real estate investor, or if you've been doing this a long time, maybe even longer than I, right? Would love the opportunity to meet with you and speak with you. Again, go to kevinbuck.com to schedule that call with me. And so, guys, without further ado, let's get on to the part of the show that you've been waiting for. So I'd like to introduce Brian Carberry. Brian, how you doing today?
Hey, Kevin. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Excited to have you here. Looking forward to chat with you. 2020, it's been a unique year. I'll leave it at that, right?
We'll leave it at that. It's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. Unique. I think it's a non-derogatory way of describing the year. Your team has been closely following, and this is what you do. This is what you do day in and day out. You guys closely follow rental and housing trends across the country, and so I'm really excited to dive into that data and not just discuss the bad and the ugly, which I think is what 2020 has kind of been made up of. Everyone just wants to talk about everything bad that's happening, but we can also talk about the good, right? Because there's always the flip side of that, and so really excited to talk about what's happening today, but also your projections. What is the data telling you for 2021? What's that going to bring our way as far as rental trends and what have you? So before we get into the meat and potatoes, Brian, if we could maybe take a few moments and just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you found your way into the space.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in this role now for about 2.5 years, and our main audience is really renters. So we're looking at what those tenants are going to be looking for, what they're going to be spending, giving them tips and advice, how to find their best home, save money, with their rent every year. But it definitely translates to the property managers and the landlords as well, because that rent money goes to someone. Before this, I worked for a staffing agency actually in marketing, doing some more content there, kind of working with temporary employees that were looking for places to work on a short-term basis, as well as the clients that were looking to hire people. So kind of a very similar approach is kind of that B2B, B2C mix that I'm kind of doing now with the housing space. Before that, I was actually a journalist for about 10 years. I was behind the camera. I was a news producer. I was at CNN for 5 years. And then before that, I was at WHDH, which was at the time an NBC affiliate up in Boston. I think it's gone independent since then. Before that, I was in Richmond, Virginia at an ABC affiliate, WRIC. And I started up in Syracuse at WSTM, which was an NBC affiliate, and went to college up there at Syracuse University. Majored in broadcasting. So definitely shifted my career path between what I went to school for and where I am now. But I think it's really about finding that story and finding the insights. There definitely is a lot of similarities really between journalism and really any career. I find if you're telling people advice or giving people information, you want to share something that's relevant to them, you just need to find really what is going to motivate them and just focus on that. So I think that's kind of really helped me in the role that I am now. Still in Atlanta, originally from Pennsylvania. I've kind of bounced around the East Coast. So that's my story in a nutshell, I guess.
Good deal. I appreciate that. What part of Pennsylvania are you from?
Outside of Philadelphia, Bucks County.
Okay, good deal. I'm from Harrisburg originally. So
there we go.
A little fun fact for those that are listening, I believe, and this is my own fun fact, but I think it to be true, is that Pennsylvania is the only state to where if you're originally from Pennsylvania, you reference it not as Pennsylvania, but I'm from PA. Use the initials as the state, as the name of the state. I don't know any other state where they might say that. Like if you're from New York, you don't say I'm from NY, or if you're from Maryland, you don't say I'm from MD, right? I think PA is that.
Maybe in a city, maybe from like LA,
yes, like NYC or something like that. But not as a state as a whole.
Louisiana, totally, absolutely.
So
I hadn't thought of that.
You find yourself saying that still when you talk to your friends back home, or like if you just reference where you're from. I'm from PA, and people are like, "What? I'm Pennsylvania." Sorry. Anyway, so let's talk about what's going on again. We were talking a little bit before we started on the show here about you put out a rent report, and historically it was an annual rent report, but it's become more of a regular reoccurring basis, almost on a monthly basis now, because 2020 literally it is a month by month, even almost a day by day, as far as what's going on, like what's happening in this world. Changes are happening incredibly fast, and lots of trends are changing one direction or the other very, very quickly. And so from a higher level, maybe we should start here as far as kind of the state of the rental market. I think everyone now, if you just turn on the news, if you've watched even a blip of news over the past 6 to 8 months, you'll know that some of the larger cities that have been harder hit by this COVID-19 pandemic, New York, LA, Chicago, Boston, what have you. There's been folks moving away from those areas. I mean, there's in turn. Maybe you can speak to what you're seeing as far as trends pertaining to your rental rates. As far as are the rates declining? Are the occupancies going down? What have you? What is the data suggesting on some of those more larger top price type cities?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, 2020 has been a unique year. And yes, we used to do this report annually because the market, had fluctuations month to month and city by city. And, every market's going to be slightly different. But as a whole, we generally saw the same trend in the rental market for what those rent prices are going to be. Generally, the prices are going to go up around April or May for the summer, and then they're going to start coming back down around September. And you're going to see that curve more or less every year. It may go up or down slightly depending on, again, the year of the market, but it's generally going to follow that trend. Well, the pandemic this year really threw everything for a loop. No one saw it coming. No one could have really predicted the impact it would have. And I don't need to go into all those details because we all know what happened with the economy and what the pandemic did. So what we saw as a whole in the rental market this year was that peak that we generally like to see or expect to see in the summer really never materialized as we would expect. It kind of stayed flat when you kind of compare year over year what those rent prices are going to do. We did see that peak starting to come up later in the summer, but it really was following kind of an unusual path that we would expect in that rental market. So when we started seeing that, we decided to do this report a little more frequently. We did one in July that kind of looked at a July versus March view of what rent prices were doing. And it showed some things, but it really wasn't a complete picture because we were still in the middle of a pandemic. And you could argue right now, we're still in the middle of a pandemic as well. So the data that we're looking at now, we were joking earlier, what I tell you today could be totally different tomorrow. It very well could be. But we did this most recent report at the end of October. And really, as you kind of hit on, we're starting to see these trends that across the nation, rent prices are slightly up year over year. But when you dive in deeper and look at regions and states and individual markets, you are noticing some major differences that we saw at this time last year. And one of them, as you brought up, is some of these notoriously expensive cities. Rent prices are really coming down. So notably, we're talking about like San Francisco and New York City are really the big ones, but we're seeing similar trends in Los Angeles, parts of Boston, Chicago, to an extent, a little bit in Miami and Southern Florida, where it's a little bit more pricey, but that's a little less of an outlier, as you might expect. It's really the San Francisco and New York that you're looking at. And I actually was pulling some data right before we got on this call just to kind of see if I could look into San Francisco a little bit more and see really what's going on there. And I kind of looked at a bunch of different views, and our report basically looks at like November versus November, just that month. Mm-hmm. So I tried to quickly compile if I rolled the whole year and tried to kind of normalize it for the pandemic and compared it to the 365 days prior, and prices are still even going down that way. So if you try to take out the impact that this pandemic's having, it almost seems that San Francisco was starting to go on that slide a little bit beforehand. Of course, we'll never know what it would have been because the pandemic really, it's not normal. It's not a normal time. But when you look at just kind of the November of this year versus November of last year data, almost every single neighborhood within San Francisco is seeing double-digit rent price declines in percentage. It's interesting to see. And a lot of it could be people just wanting to leave the city. As you mentioned, there's been news stories about New Yorkers, like, is New York dead? People just want to get out of the city. They want more space. They want to spend less money. It's expensive to live in New York for a 400 square foot apartment. And if you're cooped up during a lockdown, during a pandemic, it's not a lot of fun. And I think a lot of people, that whole dream of city living kind of became a nightmare during this pandemic because they didn't really see what that negative aspect of that city living would be. I mean, these are all hypotheses, we'll have to wait and see, but I mean, these are some of the things we're seeing in some of the data that's showing that, yes, some of these notoriously expensive cities and neighborhoods, prices are coming down for renters.
Hey guys, Kevin Bupp here with Sunrise Capital Investors. As you are hopefully already well aware if you've been a listener for any period of time, my goal has always been to provide you with as much value as I possibly can through my two podcasts, Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow and the Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. As our audience continues to grow, literally, we've been downloaded millions of times by folks in over 125 countries. I've had thousands of people reach out looking to get involved in our niche, and that's the phenomenal niche of mobile home park investing. Now, for those that don't know, I've been a full-time real estate investor for more than 20 years now, and I've personally invested in and have owned apartment complexes, various commercial properties, hundreds of single-family rentals, and I've interviewed some of the most successful investors in just about every other asset class, and I've arrived at this one very simple conclusion. Mobile home parks are hands down the best investment I've found to date. Why? They provide investors with the best risk-adjusted returns out of any other real estate sector that I've seen. Investing in real estate can get complicated, and I really want to simplify this process for you. If you're someone who wants to diversify away from the uncertainty of Wall Street and allocate a percentage of your real estate portfolio to mobile home parks, but maybe don't have the time nor the inclination to personally locate good deals yourself, then our team will do it for you. At Sunrise Capital Investors, our team specializes in the acquisitions and management of undervalued and highly profitable mobile home parks. And we are now providing accredited investors with an opportunity to participate directly alongside our team in Growth and Income Fund 3. When you invest in our fund, you get immediate diversification into multiple deals we acquired off-market that are already performing and have built-in sweat equity. And let me say this, I believe that we are hands down the best in our space at sourcing highly profitable off-market deals. That's really what makes us unique in this niche and as investment managers. As stewards of your capital, we truly are aligned with our investors. We've structured our investment fund so that we as a company are incentivized in the same way the investor is, which is through the performance of the investment itself. In addition, we want to make sure that we not only make money for our investors, but that they understand how it's being made. That's why we provide our accredited partners with a private monthly podcast that walks them through the detailed updates on how their investment is performing. And we're very transparent, providing you with the good, the bad, and the ugly at times. And so if you'd like to learn more about the partnership opportunities with our team here at Sunrise, please visit us at investwithsunrise.com and request access to the investor presentation. It's absolutely free, and you'll get instant access to review the off-market deals that we've already purchased that you can co-own with our team. Also, feel free to call us at 833-CASH-FLOW without the O. Again, that's 833-227-4359, and our investor relations team will help you schedule an appointment to speak with one of our managing principals. If you have questions, go ahead and schedule the call. Let's jump on the phone. And with that, guys, I like to leave with one last thought. From the time that I wake up in the morning till the time that I lay my head down the rest of the evening, my number one priority with everything I do, whether it be recording this podcast, working for our investors, helping each of you reach your investment goals, to providing a great experience to each of our residents who reside in our communities, is to add huge amounts of value to everyone that I come in contact with. Now, with that being said, I look forward to the opportunity of bringing value to you through Sunrise and through this podcast. Thank you for your time. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the show.
Do any of your data sources offer any projections out, assuming a vaccine is in place over, let's say, Q1, Q2 of next year? Is that data given to you as well? Do you guys follow that?
You know, we try to do the best to analyze it as we can moving forward. It's just such an abnormal time right now.
Yeah.
It's not just with the vaccine. You know, there's a new administration coming into play, which could change things. There's the eviction moratorium on renters that's set to expire at the end of the year. And the latest I saw is in Congress, they're trying to push that back a month to the end of January. But if that does expire, you could be looking at thousands of renters who are behind on their rent payments because they've lost their jobs or had other sort of financial difficulty during the pandemic. They could suddenly be forced out of their homes. So there's a lot. And if that happens, I mean, that's going to throw the rental market for a loop. I mean, it's just going to, I can't even project what that's going to do just because we don't know. We haven't seen anything to this extent. So trying to really predict out beyond, you know, the end of this year is really challenging because there are a lot of these unknowns. I would say that this is probably going to be a situation that it's going to be a more long-term fix than a short-term fix. So the trends that we're seeing now and the prices going down, we're probably going to stay on that path at least into the first half of next year, if not longer. Hopefully I'm wrong. You know, for landlords and for property managers, for renters, if you can afford it, you know, it's great right now because it's definitely a renter's market. But for investors, it might be kind of some tricky waters to navigate right now.
So I'm assuming if you live in one of those cities that have been harder hit, you know, the San Fran, LA, Chicago, New York, Boston, what have you, now might be the time to where you might want to consider, if you intend to stay, you might want to consider, renegotiating either your current lease term or, the future, renewal, what have you, or even finding another place, right? Because there's probably a lot of opportunity to maybe even upgrade and not necessarily pay more than what you're paying today. And so, given those trends with some of those higher price markets, what are some of the, obviously a declining trend, downward trend, what are some of the parts of the country or regions that have seen the boon? I mean, I know I'm down here in Florida and it seems like everyone's rushing to get to Florida and, the rental prices are just absolutely out of control here. The inventory is next to zero. I mean, just, hypothetically speaking, it's next to zero. But what are you seeing across the board? What's the data suggesting as to the areas that have really seen a boon in rental rates amidst this pandemic?
Yeah, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. It really is the South. If you look at all the unit types that we have available to us, that we have reliable data, which is really going to be studios, 1-bedroom apartments, and 2-bedroom apartments, you're seeing those prices across the board pretty much going up. Again, when you dive in at kind of a market by market, you're going to see some fluctuations here or there. But when you really look at it, it's that, southern part of the country that people are flocking to. And that is because this part of the country, I'm in Georgia, you're in Florida, you can see it yourself. Traditionally, it has been a little bit more affordable to live in parts of Florida, parts of Georgia, parts of South Carolina, as it would be in New York, or Washington State or California or anywhere like that are a little bit more pricey. People are moving down south because the weather's nice. People are retiring down south. There's just the cities down here are growing. I think I saw like Austin, Texas, for instance, has been one of the fastest growing cities in the country for the past like 3 to 5 years or something like that from census data that I saw. It's a growing area. And with that demand to live down here does come limited supply. Before the pandemic, we did see a lot of newer apartment buildings kind of opening up. The economy was doing well. It was a lot of more luxury and in-city mixed housing, mixed retail and housing type properties that were coming on the market. Once the pandemic hit, no new construction in most areas, no new construction was really taking off. So it was kind of a limited supply. If there was inventory and it gets rented up and people are willing to stay or willing to lock in at a good rate for their, yearly rent, they're going to stay there. If there's no more inventory, it creates that whole supply and demand argument that if there's not a lot of supply and there's a lot of demand, landlords can ask for more because they know people will be looking for it. Yeah. I can speak from experience. There's parts in Atlanta that if something becomes on the market for renters, unless you're working with a broker or you just happen to get lucky, you're not going to get in there because someone puts in notice they're going to leave and 2 hours later, there's a new lease signed on that property. So It really is kind of crazy right now, as you said, in parts of the South, whereas other parts of the country, we talked about these big cities in New York and California where, there's tons of inventory right now because no one wants to live there.
Yeah. How about any shifts in the trends of, folks that would historically have lived in a 1-bedroom now are looking for a 2-bedroom? Maybe they're working from home or maybe they just want more space to roam around. A lot of folks have been stuck inside, right? Like they're getting cabin fever. Have you seen a shift away from the studio and 1-bedrooms and an emphasis put on the larger 2 and 3-bedroom units?
Yep, there definitely is an emphasis on larger living space. Traditionally, and I guess it's really not traditionally, but recently we've seen studio apartments on average actually being slightly higher or more expensive than 1-bedrooms. And a lot of that is because, as I said, some of these newer properties that were coming on the market or new lofts, for instance, a studio loft apartment could be 1,000 square feet, whereas a 1-bedroom apartment traditionally would be 700 to 800 square feet. You're going to get more space in that studio apartment than you would in that 1-bedroom apartment. It might be a little nicer. Lofts are were the in thing, over the past couple of years and tended to be a little bit more pricey. So people were paying more money for that, studio loft experience. Whether it's a studio or 1-bedroom, it really doesn't matter during a pandemic when you really either have just one open room as a studio or 1-bedroom as a 1-bedroom. If you are working from home or you just want some more space and you can get something that's a little bit older, not as updated, you could go into a 2-bedroom for really not that much more than you would spend for a luxury 1-bedroom or a luxury studio. So we are seeing a shift in people looking for more living space, whether that's moving out of the city, as we talked about with New York, to a more suburban area where they have a backyard and they might just have larger buildings, just staying within the same area, but looking for just that extra bedroom. There definitely are people doing that. We're also seeing a shift in younger people. The Gen Zers are moving back home because they're looking to save money. They're not making a lot as a whole as it is because they're just out of college. They're struggling to find jobs. They're going back home, living with their parents to try to build up a little bit of that savings fund so they can rent. We're also seeing people on the other end of the spectrum. They're the baby boomers that maybe are downsizing and rather than looking to live on their own, might move back in with their kids for a little bit so everyone can save money. So it's kind of a weird multi-generational shift of living together that we're seeing right now that I would say is unique due to the pandemic. There's always been, people living at home or parents moving in with kids. I mean, that's not unique, but to the extent that we're seeing it right now is a little bit unique. So definitely some interesting renter demographic trends that we're seeing right now.
I was absolutely blown away by that part of the article that you wrote about the household consolidation. Now I'm going to go ahead and read it here. You referenced the data that was put out by Pew Research Center, and 52, I mean, holy crap, 52% of adults 18 to 29 are living with their parents because of the pandemic. I mean, that is a mind-boggling number. So my question is, what do you perceive to be the long-term effects of this, for the demand, future demand for rental units, assuming that we continue to build? Does there become a point in time where certain markets have excess supply because this large batch of folks are staying at home longer or moving back in with their parents. Maybe they were part of the renter pool and they move back in with their parents and they intend to stay for a number of years. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have any data to support it, but I would say that if these people are smart, they're going to be saving their money for a housing down payment rather than saving their money for rent. So I would say that if you are someone fresh out of college and you're moving back home for 5 years, whatever it might be a year, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, hopefully not 10 years, but whatever that might be, if you're not paying for rent, bank that money, invest it in some way, put it in a CD, whatever you're going to do, and get a little bit more for a down payment. The housing market, and who knows, interest rates probably aren't going to stay as low as they are right now for mortgages, but say they're more, favorable than they were 3 years ago. And people come out and they suddenly have $15,000 to $20,000 that they would have spent over a year on rent, and they haven't had to spend it. They put it in a bank account or they've been smart with their money. That gives them a pretty sizable down payment, depending on the market that they're in, to get into a starter home. So I would think that you are going to see a shift in some younger people that are first-time home buyers than they would be renters, rather than waiting until they get into their 30s to move out of an apartment, have a family, settle down into a home. I think it's going to be more favorable to that housing market than it is going to be the rental market.
Yeah, got it. Do you guys track any data that shows any of the trends of folks that were historically apartment renters that have moved more towards renting a single family home, not buying a single family home, but renting a single family home? Has there been any shifts in those trends?
I would say I don't have any data to actually support by market, but I can speak from experience and just people that I've spoken with. A lot of the renters that I kind of work, a lot of people are looking for single family homes for the same argument as it gives you more space. It gives you a backyard. Like, I'm kind of an example of that. I was renting. I then went to a single family home. I'm now owning my home, but this was before the pandemic. But for the same reasons that people during a pandemic are looking to get into a home, I was too. I was tired of living in a building with a lot of people, running into my neighbors all the time. And I'm a social guy, but there are times during, at midnight that I don't want to hear my neighbors, or I'd rather walk my dog and not have to get into a conversation in the hall when all I want to do is go to bed. Where I've got a single family home, if I'm renting it, I'd take the dog out into the backyard or let it out. If, you have a fenced property like I do, and you don't have to deal with that. I'm friendly with my neighbors, but I can maintain my distance from them. Yeah. I think there is going to be that push more so than we see now, especially the longer the pandemic goes on. And we talked about the vaccine and everything, and who knows what that's going to be, when we're all going to be able to have access to it. But I think renting single family homes is a great option for renters and a great option for people that are looking for an easy way to invest in real estate. Buy a property and rent it out, because you are going to have that demand for people that want to get into a space that gives them a little bit more room, a little bit bigger of a backyard, possibly some more storage, and you're not on top of your neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. Brian, what are some of the other data trends that you guys are tracking or that you feel would be relevant to this conversation and important for our listeners to know as it relates to, again, just rental trends across the country?
Yeah, it's not highlighted in our report, but I would like to bring up about people actually making rent payments, because one of the things that we've heard about with the whole eviction moratorium and people losing their jobs and been unable to afford their rent, people actually are on a whole still paying rent. If you look at statistics from the National Multifamily Housing Council, we're showing that anywhere from about 95 to 93% of tenants since May each month have made at least a partial rent payment. Mm-hmm. It's partial. So, it might be, say the rent's $1,500, maybe they're paying $500 toward it, but a lot of renters are still being responsible for the dues that they owe. So there's not a lot of landlords out there that are just being stiffed by renters that are just like, oh, well, you can't evict me anyway for non-payment of rent if I can prove that I have hardship because of the pandemic. I'm just going to take advantage of this and not pay my rent. I'm sure there are some people like that out there. There's always going to be bad apples everywhere you are. If you're a landlord, chances are you may run into a bad tenant here or there. But I think a lot of renters are being responsible and are doing what they can. And a lot of landlords in turn are understanding of the situation that renters are in and are willing to work with them, whether it's a deferred payment plan or partial payment plan or dipping into security deposits or whatever it might be. We're all human. We're all kind of going through this together. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that it's not just the renters that are being hurt right now. They can't afford to pay their rent. The landlords are struggling too, because whether it's a single family home, like a mom and pop landlord that buys a property to rent out, or it's someone who owns a big multi-family property that has 500 units, for every little bit of rent that can't be paid, obviously that's a little less that's going into the pockets of the landlord. And they've got bills too, whether it's, their mortgage or they're paying their employees or they have to pay for utilities within the property for what they might be covering. Like it's kind of a trickle down. So you see a lot in the news today about rent relief, and rent relief is needed. Renters need some help. They need bailouts or whatever it might be. And I agree with that to an extent. But I think the next administration, when they come up with some sort of plan, which I think they will, I hope they will, needs to take into account what landlords are dealing with as well.
Yeah.
And have some sort of relief for them. I know I'm kind of going on a soapbox right now and getting a little report, but it's just one of those things that, I side with the renters because that's mainly who I'm talking with, I'm dealing with. But there is that whole other, like the landlords get a bad rap. They really do. They're seen as the bad guys right now, but they have just as much struggle. So I just think that whatever happens, it needs to be beneficial to both.
It's like peanut butter and jelly, man. One doesn't work without the other, right? I mean, if that mom and pop landlord can't afford to pay their mortgage and that property gets foreclosed on, that gets tied up in the, in the court system and literally just becomes a non-rentable unit at some point, that's less inventory in the marketplace. The renter gets kicked out. I mean, everyone loses in that scenario. And so I agree with you. I feel for the renters that have lost their jobs or lost their source of income equal amounts as I feel for, the landlords that have worked really hard. This is a retirement, whether they're a small mom and pop or a big group, either way, they've got most of the time have had debt service to pay. They've got bills, what have you. And the margins aren't nearly as large as what a lot of people might suspect they are. Right. So in any event, it's a not a great situation all the way around. Another trend that we've seen personally in our portfolio, and I think it probably holds true across the board when, even when you just look at multifamily in general, when you look at A class versus B class versus C class, our portfolio kind of spans that entire spectrum of C through A. We've got assets that are A, we've got that are B and C. And it seems as though the C class assets have suffered a little greater than those that are the A class. And the only thing I can attribute that to is a lot of our A class residents have jobs or have positions to where they can be truly virtual, right? They can work from a laptop, they can work from a computer. They also might have had a little more savings than that of a person that's living paycheck to paycheck in a typical C-class environment. And so, and I'm not sure if you're seeing those same trends as well, but I know that we've personally have experienced that.
Yeah, I would say that, your A-class, your more luxury units are always going to be in popular demand. If people can afford them, if people haven't lost their job, like right now, some of these prices on the luxury units are the ones that are really coming down because they're more expensive to start as it was. And landlords would rather take a little bit of a hit on what that monthly rent would be than have the unit sit vacant. That's an obvious, conclusion that they'll make. So if a unit would normally cost $3,000 and a landlord is going to rent it for $2,500, then someone's going to rent that unit, whether it's someone that could have afforded the $3,000 originally, or it's someone that was right on the cusp and now can afford it because it's coming down slightly. I think you're always going to have a demand for that type of unit. I think at the same time, the general renter that is in the more affordable housing situation, yes, are probably going to be the more hourly workers and living paycheck to paycheck. But there's also going to it's going to be kind of blended because you're going to see people that are kind of in the middle. They can't necessarily afford a luxury unit, but can easily, well, not easily, no one can easily afford anything, I don't think these days, but are more comfortable with a housing payment, might make the smarter decision to cut back a little bit on their rent payment and go for a more affordable option. So it's just going to kind of shift what that demographic looks like. The stereotypical, affordable housing tenant is probably going to change, over the next few years if this trend plays out. But, we'll see. It really just depends on what the market does and what happens with the eviction moratorium. I think is going to really play a role in a lot of it because, as you said, it is going to be some of these, hourly workers that are really going to be hit by that. And that's where you will see a lot of that impact if all of a sudden, a ton of affordable housing income or lower income renters get evicted. There's going to be a lot of vacancies right there. And, who knows what that's going to do. On an average, it's going to drive rent prices down in areas because there's going to be a lot more affordable options on the market. But that really isn't going to be a true indicative, trend of what the market is doing, if that makes sense. Just because And this is an argument that I get into with some of my peers sometimes. When you look at it like, oh, well, that's good. Like if a lot of more affordable houses are on the market for people, yeah, it's going to bring down overall rent prices. It's great for renters, but it's going to drive attention, like in an interview, toward, oh, San Francisco prices are going down. And I'm not saying this is what's happening in San Francisco. I think that's different. I'm just using that as an example. It could negatively impact just the perception of what's happening in a market. A long-winded way of kind of getting around and saying that.
I agree.
It remains to be seen.
Yeah. And the good thing, guys, is the reason why we love mobile home parks is because in any market across the country, mobile home parks truly represent the most affordable housing type of any other type of residential housing unit. So those folks that, for whatever reason, can't afford that C-class and are looking to, or maybe they're just looking to step into a little bit of a cheaper housing payment, what have you, we're there for them. So anyway, I just figured I'd get a little shameless plug there for mobile home parks and why we love it. Well, Brian, this has been great. Lots of great information you share. Really appreciate you coming on here. What I'd love to do now is enter into what we call the Golden Nugget segment. And this is where I'd like to ask you if you had one final Golden Nugget of advice or wisdom that you could leave with our listeners here today that might inspire and motivate them as they progress in their real estate investing career. What would that one last Golden Nugget be? And it doesn't have to be real estate investing related, because I know that's not necessarily the topic of the conversation, but any one last piece of advice or words of wisdom that you can leave with them?
Yeah, I would say, and this really would pertain to either now or a year from now or whenever it might be, is there's always going to be a risk involved, as everyone knows with investing. Right now, that risk might be slightly higher, but I do think the market is going to rebound. I don't think that we're always going to see these trends of these hot cities coming down. I don't think San Francisco will get back up to the level where it was, but I think we're kind of reaching like that bottom. We're about to bottom off and things are going to come back. So I would say just, find that level of risk that you're comfortable with, whether it's investing or really anything. And if you are comfortable with something, go ahead and do it. Like, don't play the what if game. I've done that with a lot of things that I've said, well, what if I do this? And I hesitate and I miss out on a great opportunity. If you're comfortable with something and you think you can manage it, sometimes that risk is worth it. But, do your homework, do your research. Great advice.
Brian, for those that want to learn more about you, maybe follow your work, what have you, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn if you just want to learn more about me, Brian Carberry. But if you want to follow my work, go to apartmentguide.com, go to the blog link, or do apartmentguide.com/blog, similarrent.com/blog. You'll find all the articles that we've done there. Again, a lot of it pertains to renters themselves and the tenants, giving them advice. But we do put out a lot of really great content regarding data in certain areas and what rent prices are doing and trends. We're trying to keep you as up to date as possible and keep really the market up to date as possible with what we're doing. We're going to be doing reports like this monthly starting next year. So you'll see a lot more great insights from us and some real great takeaways in what's happening in the industry.
All righty. Well, fantastic. Well, Brian, thanks for joining us here. That's all we have, my friend.
Thank you.
All righty, guys. Well, that's all we have for this week's show. So until we meet again next week, this is your host, Kevin Bupp, wishing you huge success. You take care.
Congratulations. Now you've got more of the best tricks of the trade in building massive amounts of passive income from real estate. For more amazing resources, visit realestateinvestingforcashflow.com. We'll see you next Monday morning.